Right. Hello, hello. Welcome to Birthing the Gifts. I am clinical psychologist Dr. Khiela Holmes, and here at Birthing the Gifts, we provide a safe and compassionate space to grow your God-given gifts. So, in this interview series, for those that have been following the interviews, we discuss the process of people giving birth to their gifts. So, today we have with us Dr. Terrence Roberts. Thank you so much for joining this platform. It is much appreciated. I said it before we started recording, but I want to say it on the recording that I very much appreciate you taking time to serve as a guest on this platform. So thank you for being here.
My pleasure.
Yes, absolutely. So we got a chance. I've been knowing, I like to say a little bit, Dr. Roberts, in terms of kind of how I came to know the speaker. So I'm thinking, I think I first met you in person. It may have been back in 2014, maybe 14, 15, but it's through the Arkansas Association of Black Psychology Professionals. And I know Dr. Griffin, a psychologist in Arkansas, reached out to you and you've been supportive of the initiatives that we do through our organization. So I was thinking it was through that or some other psychology organization that I met you first. And so I've been continuing to get to know you and to kind of just know more about you and who you are. And so I hope today that we're able to talk about that some more.
Sounds good.
Um, yeah. So I know before in preparation for this, you told me some about kind of how you viewed what I like to refer to as people's gift package. So you shared some with me, but if you don't mind just kind of talking some about that in terms of, and I sometimes I go chronologically, you'll notice that I'll do that. But so maybe we'll kind of start that from your earliest memory that you felt like you even had a sense of this is something that maybe I was gifted with, this gifted ability, this talent, this interest. How would you describe that for yourself?
I think for me, it was very early in life, really, going all the way back, say, to first grade. I had a crazy experience in my first grade year. One of my classmates decided there was something about me that he really didn't like. To this day, I don't know what it was or what it is, if it's still going on. But he he leaped on my back and pushed me down face first in the rocks on Gibbs Playground. Unfortunately, it was a rocky playground, and it caused me some distress. But I wasn't angry, and that was a new thing. I couldn't figure out why he'd done it. I seemed to have no reason for having done it. But I remember my thought was, I wish I could figure out how I can help him. Now, that was for a little kid. That's pretty stretching it a little bit. I've seen other little kids that age, and they don't do that.
Yes, that's why I'm kind of interested in that part too. But go ahead, like it's interesting. That was the way you processed that.
Yeah, I spoke to the teacher about it. Of course, she was involved in resolving everything, and she just sort of told me that it wasn't my fault. I knew that. She was, she's very kind and loving. But so I went home that day, still puzzled about it, talked it over a bit with my mom, and we probably had the first of what would become many conversations about the use of violence.
Mm,
My mom was one of those people who did not believe that human beings ever had to use violence.
mm,
And she didn't drum it into my head, but we talked about it a lot. And she told me I had options that were completely open. According to her, she said, you could choose to be violent if you want to, but
mm,
I would advise against it. Ah, okay. So we talked, and she said, you see, it's like this. Human beings, with the brains they have the ability to use other options.
mm,
First, you have to know what those options are, and you have to realize that you can use them when you need to. You don't have to use violence of any kind. And that seemed to be something that was in harmony with my DNA package.
mm,
Now, I take no credit for that. I'm just born with it. And to this day, I would prefer never to be in a situation where violence was around me,
mhm,
even if I weren't included,
mhm,
because I've had some crazy times watching other people get beaten up, for instance, especially at
Mhm.
school. A lot of fighting at schools for some reason.
Mhm.
One time, I was still an elementary school kid. We were having an annual Halloween party one evening, and I happened to walk outside the gym, and I saw high school kids, all males, three of them beating up on one other male. So the
Mhm.
odds were off, 3-1. Two
Mhm.
of the guys were holding this one guy while the other one was punching him. And I
Mhm.
thought, wow, uh, this makes no sense. I was
Mhm.
too young to intervene. I didn't know the words to intervene. I didn't know what to do, what to say. But
Mhm.
it caused me a lot of internal distress. And I
Mhm.
must admit, I was also afraid if they got tired of beating him, they might start beating me. So I
Mhm.
better remove myself from the scene, which I did. I went back inside.
Mhm.
And another time, it wasn't actually a fight, but it was at a party. And I was talking with a young girl. I'm in high school now.
Okay.
And we're talking, and he comes over and says, "Why are you talking to my girlfriend?" It was a surprise to me. It was a surprise to her. She knew nothing
Okay.
about it.
He didn't know
But
she was the girlfriend.
he
Okay.
seemed intent
Mhm.
on making his point that this was his girlfriend.
Mhm.
And he threatened me that if I didn't get away from her, then bad things would happen.
Mhm.
So I talked it over with her, and I said, you know what, this probably isn't going to end well for either one of us. So I'm going to leave. I'm going home. I would advise you to do the same thing. And so I left. I don't know what happened. I didn't hear any report that anything bad had happened. I didn't really think he'd do anything to her, but
Mhm.
I found out that was not an unusual thing. There were a number of people who had this notion that if they selected a person to be their special friend, whether that special friend agreed or not, that was a
Wow.
reality for that person.
Mhm.
But that's just another example. But I thought,
Mhm.
that, and that was a form of violence in my book,
Mhm. Mhm.
violent encounter. And so I would always choose to either try to minimize or leave
Mhm.
rather than fight.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
learned to use words very quickly and very early in life. Now, there
Mhm.
was a rare time when I did fight.
Mhm.
And this is pertinent here because I learned something else. I learned when I was still in middle school that I had the capacity to kill. I didn't know that. I, nowhere would I've ever landed on that as something that I had to watch out for. But this kid used to pick on me. He
Mhm.
liked to thump my head. Every time he saw me, he would go.
Mhm.
And I pleaded with him to stop. I said, thing is, it hurts. It's uncomfortable. It's an intrusive thing. Would you
Mhm.
please stop? He'd laugh and thump me again. And I would just try to avoid him during the day. Finally got so bad, I changed my schedule. I arrived at school at a different time. I entered by a different door. He always found me.
Mhm.
Finally, I didn't know what to do, so I confronted him. And and that's something else I had learned from my mom. You know, she was the first one to teach me about the concept of caring enough to confront. She said, if you really care about people, you will confront them. You won't leave them in their misery or whatever they're doing, but you'll speak your truth. So I spoke my truth to him. I said, you know what? I've tried everything. And I went over the list of things I had done to try and get away from him. I said, none of them work, as you see. I said, but what I've concluded is that I don't want that to happen anymore. And if you, and I used gestures, I pointed at him and I said, if you thump my head one more time, I will hurt you. Now, I had no idea what that meant because I didn't know
Mhm.
how to think.
Okay.
At least I didn't think so.
Mhm.
As fate would have it, I assumed, though, that he'd hurt me because he smiled and seemed to accept that. I walked away gratified, things over. Not so.
Mhm.
He thumped my head again. Now, I'm a little fuzzy on exactly what happened. That kid wound up in need of emergency room services. I I was shocked. To this day, I don't know exactly what happened, but I I was lost. I mean, my whole sense of being was caught up in that moment, and I
Wow.
knew if I didn't kill him, he would kill me. At
Mhm.
least that was my elementary thinking.
Mhm.
Turns out, in the aftermath of that episode, word got out around the middle school. Don't bother that guy Roberts. He's crazy. So
Okay. Wow.
Now that was an unexpected bonus because I didn't have to,
Mm,
nobody else would bother me. So I didn't have to worry about fighting. I
mm,
didn't intend that, of course. I
mm-hmm,
thought
mm-hmm,
about it that way. But I have since come to understand that yes, I do have the capacity to kill, but I choose not to. That's very
mm,
important. And in my work with young people along the way, doing clinical work with young people who were in the midst of doing violent things, I would often
mm,
try and let them know. I said, well, yeah, you do have the capacity to hurt, to harm, to kill. You can do all of that. Echoing my mom, because she said all options are open. I'm
mm,
not here to tell you what you should do. I'm just here to tell you what's possible.
mm,
So I use it to great advantage in my clinical work with young kids, putting the responsibility on them. It's your choice. Letting
mm,
them know that nobody else can make a choice for you.
mm,
Everything that happens in your life happens as a consequence of your choice.
mm,
Now,
mm,
a lot of them didn't believe me about that. They want to put the
mm,
blame on someone else.
mm,
That person made me do X, Y, Z. No, no,
mm,
it's
no,
never that makes you do anything. You
mhm,
choose what you're going to do.
mhm,
But what from that
wow,
moment on, I chose never again to act in that way.
mm,
So I didn't have any sense that I would try and kill anybody else. And it's true,
mhm,
I haven't since. I've not done
mhm,
that. But it was such a powerful lesson. And the
mm,
way
mhm,
it was structured was surprising. But
mhm,
in a sense, I'm glad because it
mhm,
helped me person
yeah,
figure out, yeah, I have that choice, but I don't have to do that. Not something that
mhm,
I'm or,
yeah, like it's your
must.
choice to decide whether to act in that way in various situations. That sounds like a powerful lesson indeed that you learned early on.
Yeah,
Mhm,
today I tell people sometimes that I am 99.9% nonviolent
mhm,
uh, because I'm not certain that I wouldn't kill
mhm,
somebody given the circumstances.
mhm,
Uh, there are about 5 or 6 people in my life that I know if somebody did something to one of them, I might be tempted to do
mhm,
that.
mhm,
I'm praying it never happens because I don't want to.
right. Mhm,
So
of
again,
course.
I try to de-escalate if something is,
Mhm,
and that there have been times for instance, when I've been out with my wife and I'm, being protective of her,
mhm,
and other people start doing things that make no sense. I've been
mhm,
able to talk my way through it and get away. Um, well, here's an example. We were in Pasadena, so we lived for a long time on the, what do you call that? The tram line. Oh, I
mhm,
forgot what you exactly call that thing. The train. Okay, so
mhm,
we're on the
okay.
platform waiting
Mhm,
to get on the train, and this guy comes up with his camera. He starts taking pictures of my wife without her consent. So
mm,
I stepped in front of her and I said, "You can't do that. You haven't gotten permission from her to do that." He goes on about how it's his right to take pictures of whoever, whenever, however he wants. And I thought, hmm, I hope this guy's open to communication because I don't know that
mm,
he's bigger than I was. I didn't think
mm,
I could take him on, although I would have been willing to.
mhm.
Turns out, though, people in the crowd began to be involved and they helped mitigate. And that's
Oh,
something
wow.
else. Doesn't always
Mm,
happen. Sometimes you
mm,
can count on other people providing a force, if you will,
mhm,
that you can
mhm.
use. So
Yeah.
we can get out of that one. It's interesting.
Wow.
Life on the planet.
Mhm. Yes, quite interesting. If I could, Dr. Roberts, go back to something that you said, because I love how you're giving these examples throughout your life about this theme of your preference is to choose nonviolence and to verbally de-escalate where possible. Um, but you said something earlier. Would you say, and I don't know if I'm using a word that would resonate with you, that it was both maybe your temperament, just kind of how you came into the world, how you were wired to lean in that direction, plus it was nurtured by the values of your mom, would you say, to kind of
Oh,
then really
yeah,
form that?
definitely
Okay.
so. Definitely so. There was a match from the beginning. My mom was a
Mm,
very special person. I don't know where she got the wisdom she had.
mhm,
I marvel at it today. Um,
mhm,
just as a side, I marvel about a lot of things she did because there were 7 kids in the family,
mhm,
2 parents and 7 kids. There's 9 of us. I always thought this is remarkable. How are we surviving? How do we pay for stuff? Where does the money come from? Because we
Wow.
didn't have much. But she was never, ever upset about stuff.
Mhm.
Well, of course she was at times, but rarely. I
Mhm.
can say there were very few times when she was upset.
Mhm.
Uh, for instance, here's another example. We were in a church, and the church people began to spread rumors about her.
Mhm.
When my brother was born, my second brother, there are three boys in the family, he came out with a skin complexion that was much lighter than the rest of us.
Mhm.
Rumors started flying around that somehow he was the child of the milkman. The milkman,
Okay.
milk was delivered to Holmes in the
Mhm.
delivering the milk. And so she decided, rather than contend with that and upset people in the church by showing up after she had supposedly done all these dastardly things, resulted in a pregnancy, she would just stop going. But
Mhm.
here's what she did. She said to us kids, the older kids, myself and two sisters, you don't have to follow my lead. You can still attend church. It's okay. But I'm doing it because I want to save the other people from whatever it is they're dealing with. And I don't know how to get
Mhm.
at this point.
Mhm.
Okay. So we did. We continued to go to church, which is another thing altogether.
Wow. Like that's so interesting because Dr. Roberts, as you're talking, and you said that you've worked with children, and just for those that's listening, you're a clinical psychologist. I just want to be clear because you talked about clinical work and working with children.
Right.
So yeah, yeah, yeah. So I just want to just kind of clarify that. But so we often think about, and when I talk to people on this interview series, they often talk about adults in their life, be it their parents, grandparents, aunts, uncles, people at their school, or just some adult who helped to maybe nurture. Maybe it was something, a gifting that they were born with, but they helped to nurture it. And sometimes they talk about specific examples of how that adult did that. But it sounds like your mom was very, it sounds like from what you're saying, like she talked to you and your siblings
Yes.
about things. Like, so that's how you knew it because she would not only model it, but verbalize.
Which was a very important part of it
Mhm.
because she told us, all the kids, she told all of us that we could come to her and say whatever was going on with us. And she said, I will not judge you.
Mm,
Now, that was another little building block. Here was an
mm,
opportunity to speak my truth aloud in her presence, knowing in
mhm.
advance that there would be no negative judgment passed. She would
Wow.
simply absorb, process, and then respond.
Mhm.
And I recall, this is a crazy thing. I was high school still. It was a summer day. I was bored. I was bored out of my mind, really. I had nothing on the agenda. It was the evening. Well, evening was approaching. And the paper boy came up on a motorcycle. And I thought, aha, here's an opportunity. I've got something to do.
Mhm.
So I asked him if I could ride on the motorcycle with him. And he said, well, sure. So it was an evening paper. He delivered the paper. And I got on the back of this motorcycle. And we go roaring off down the street. Now, this was my first time ever in life being on a motorcycle
Mhm.
as a passenger or the rider. So I'm, hanging on. I'm hanging on to him, and a dog comes running out toward the motorcycle. I decided I'm going to kick this dog. Now, that seems to fly in the face of my nonviolence
Mhm.
concept, but I'm thinking this dog's going to bite me. I need to protect
Mhm.
myself. So
Mhm.
I started somehow trying to, I never hit the dog really, but in trying to move my leg around to try and get a hit in, a kick in, I lost my balance.
Mhm.
I fell off the motorcycle. I don't know how fast we were going, but we were going at some speed. I landed on my feet,
Mhm.
but I was going too fast to maintain a balance. I went
Mhm.
flop, face down on the street,
Oh,
broke out two teeth, still have a scar right here, you can tell. Um, and I've got a big abrasion on this shoulder, which I still have a keloid as a consequence.
okay.
Dazed and bloody, we were about a block and a half from home.
Mhm.
And I told the paper boy, I said, look, there's no need of you getting involved in this. You could be blamed or something. You should just go. He did.
Mhm.
I walked home, walk in the house. It's dusk. The lights are off in the house because in the summertime in Little Rock, you don't have air conditioning. Can't afford any heat. So we turn the lights off, right? So my
Okay.
mom's in her bedroom reading and has a low light. She can't see me when I appear at the doorway. So I flick on the switch for the overhead. She looks up and starts screaming, and I click the light off.
Mhm.
And she jumps up, and but again, true to form, she didn't come at me with finger pointing and yelling and screaming. She was just shocked and surprised to see me in this bloody state.
Mhm.
Flew into action. She got us
Mhm.
to the university hospital where I got
Mhm.
emergency treatment. And one thing she said was, um, I don't know how we're going to deal with your teeth because we don't have any money. And so
Mhm.
I went for several months with no teeth.
Oh, wow.
So in a sense, that was my punishment,
Okay.
although it wasn't phrased that way.
Mhm.
But
Wow.
that's an example of how important it is to have somebody in your life who
Mhm.
always will have your back,
Right.
knowing that
Mhm.
you will do crazy stuff in
Mhm.
advance. Happens
Mhm.
all kids.
Mhm.
Some parents don't know that, and some
Mhm.
kids don't know that. But it's
Right.
important to have that, if at all
Mhm.
possible, in your life.
Mhm. Yeah, to know that you still have somebody there that will love you through it. Love you
Exactly right.
through it, be with you, support you, get you the help you need in whatever way that is. So it's like your mom got you to where you needed, though she was, of course, shocked initially and surprised to see you in that state. Understandably so, it was able to move into action. I love that. I love that.
Later on, as
Mm,
I recovered, we had a conversation about that event,
mm,
and she just wanted to know, how did you come about making that decision? So
mm,
I talked through it, and she said, well, uh, it's important for you to really think through your decisions. So in
mm,
future, keep this as a point of reference.
mhm,
If you choose this, here are the likely outcomes. Oh,
mhm,
okay. So then it became something I could apply universally. Think
mm.
ahead,
Yeah.
find the best possible option, and
Mhm.
only choose that one. And
Wow.
that's a big chore because it speaks to a fund of knowledge and information you may not have,
Mhm.
which I think is what a
Wow.
lot of young kids get in trouble about these days. They don't have
Mm.
enough options.
Right.
A few and they use them over and over, but they're not always the right options.
Yeah, not the best quality options. That's right. That is an important life skill. It sounds like your mom just continuously taught you all very important life skills and helping you just to navigate through difficult times. Because the other thing I also heard, and I don't know, I didn't hear you say the exact word, but I think when we met before today, before this interview, you may have said this exact word, but I felt like I heard it in what you said about your mom is compassion. I don't know if that's because I've heard you talk about that even from when you said at Gibbs when you were in first grade. Even the little boy that I guess was kind of picking you, even it
Mhm.
almost sounded like it was a level of curiosity maybe or compassion, like for him as opposed to aggressing back. It was like a level of curiosity and compassion. So I don't know if that came from your mom or that was natural.
It was probably there and maybe in a nascent form, but as I
Mhm.
have aged through life, I've come to appreciate this whole notion of what it takes to be fully human.
Mhm.
I think it lies within the realm of human relationships.
Mhm.
How do people relate to each other
Mhm.
across whatever lines there may be separated? And if you can figure out how to do that, I have this thing where I consider a building block for building a community of substance.
Mhm.
Starts with two people, dyad, both people more than willing to speak honestly to each other, caring enough to confront, etc. And if those two people can do that effectively, they become a model for others who can replicate what they see. Now we have another building block and another until finally you have a foundation that is
Mhm.
sure. Now that can only happen when people are willing to turn their focus away from self long enough to see that there's another
Mhm.
person who is of value, person who has something to offer.
Mhm.
And if we're willing to do that, uh, magic can happen.
Mhm.
And I figured out, I don't know, I can't trace it, step by step, but I've come to appreciate that. I've seen it happen since I was quite young, and I continue to see it happening,
Mhm.
every day. I mean, it doesn't happen all the time. Some
Mhm.
days you don't see it at all, but it
Mhm.
is there potentially.
Mhm.
Watching two people come together.
Mhm.
And I heard something recently, which is germane here, in terms of how people think about others.
Mhm.
There's a scale that goes from apathy to sympathy to empathy to compassion.
Mhm.
And of course, at the top of that scale, you don't care anything about anybody. You're apathetic.
Mhm.
Get
Mhm.
out of my face. I don't want to see you anymore. But then a step further, you actually feel some sympathy.
Mhm.
And you say things like, "Oh wow, that's really bad. And that's a pity. Such a bad thing. I'm so sorry." That's sympathy.
Mhm.
Even further is empathy, where now you begin to feel with the person and
Mhm.
you may earnestly start praying on behalf of that person, right?
Mhm.
Passion,
Mhm.
that's what we long for. That's where you
Mhm.
not only feel with, you feel the same as, and you do, it's sort of like the Good Samaritan from Scripture. You see what's happening, and you
Mhm.
know in a flash that somebody's got to do it, and you're the only one there. You got to do it. It's your job.
Mhm.
Okay.
Mhm.
You got to put
Mhm.
out the money, you got to put out the time, you got to change your schedule. That's compassion.
Mhm.
Quite rare in society.
Mhm.
But
Wow.
and I think that was also available to me quite early.
Okay.
I remember coming home from school on any given day, and there would be people in the house I didn't know.
Hmm.
My mom would gather people. She was this compassionate person. People needed a place to sleep, they needed food to eat, they needed their hair done, whatever it was, she was
Mhm.
there. She'd make it
Mhm.
happen.
Wow.
Uh, and so I didn't have those words then, but I do
Mhm.
now looking at it, and I can
Right.
see what was happening.
Because you
Because not
saw it. It sounds like you still took it in, like it still influenced you and impacted you just to see that growing up. And now you can more put it into words, put that experience into words.
yes, yes,
Mm-hmm.
it's all
Yeah.
about seeing other people as
Yeah.
truly human.
Mm-hmm.
Another way my mom put it was, you don't have to look up to anybody. You don't need to look down on anybody. It's always
Mm-hmm.
eyeball to eyeball,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of the circumstance.
Yeah.
Pithy piece of information, but so vital.
Mm-hmm.
That has served me well.
That's extraordinarily vital. Yeah. So this is what I wanted because we talked about kind of nonviolence, right? That value of nonviolence, verbal de-escalation, choice, right? Having choice, thinking ahead, definitely thinking ahead, kind of problem solving, and then now this concept of compassion. So that's I feel like in general, sort of the values that were instilled into you and kind of the gifts you've noticed about yourself over time. How do you feel like any of those and maybe things we haven't discussed showed up for you during your time where you were at Central? Like, do you recall that impacting that time? And if so, in what way?
Oh yeah, quite a lot really.
Okay.
Going into that situation, I must say, one of the first things I realized was that my fear level was off the chart.
Mm,
I'd never been that afraid. Uh, Fear was not something that plagued me, but when I got there and people were yelling and screaming and saying they wanted to kill us, that was frightening stuff. So I began to process it, and as the school year went on, and I saw what happened with these students who were giving us such a bad time, and I saw their faces.
mm,
Because that's another thing I would do. I would look at people, try and get a clue about who they were. And their faces told me that they were angry I didn't know about what. I never considered that they were angry at us, me
Mhm.
personally, because you get into trouble, I think, dealing with that because you're so protective of self. But when you can just try and see, well, what is going on? Let's assume they're not angry with you, but they're angry and they may take it out on you. That's a different thing. Then it dawned on me, just like a lightning flash. Ah, they've been sold a bill of goods. They've been told that Black kids are different. They're inferior. They can't learn. Their brains are truncated. I said, wow, they've been fed this garbage. They believe it.
Mhm.
That is sad. That's where my sense of compassion came in. I wanted to help, but there seemed to be no avenue. People were not willing to engage. I remember one of my teachers at Central, English teacher, told me one day, well, she didn't tell me, but she said this. She says, why do you want to come to our school? Why don't you go back to your own school? And she said in a voice like that, with a lot more venom, really. And I looked at her and I thought, something wrong here. Something very wrong. This woman is supposedly an educator, and nothing about that thing she just said to me speaks to education. Why is she saying that kind of stuff? I made the assumption that she may have had a mental health problem. So
Mhm.
I thought, there's no need of me trying to have a conversation with her because she probably wouldn't be able to hold up her end. So I just smiled and walked off.
Mhm.
And I thought, I do need to figure out, though, a way to try and get through even to people like that. I can't write them off
Mhm.
because they are just valuable like all humans, right? At
Mhm.
least that's the thing I picked up along the way. But yeah, that sense of compassion was there. I thought, and I look out at the crowd. Sometimes we were in school, and if one of the nine of us would pass by an open door or window, the voice level would go up. A lot more
Mhm.
epithets thrown our way. And I looked out there and I saw grandparents, and I'm making this assumption because of the age gap. The little kids they were holding must have been grandkids.
Mhm.
They were babysitting. They brought these kids out on the line to protest
Wow.
to put it mildly. They were there to kill. That's what they said they were there for. I believe them. And that's another thing. You have to believe when people say they're going to do something, that's what they mean.
Mhm.
Don't try and clean it up. Just act as if it's true because they're saying it.
Mhm.
I believe that people do say what's really going on inside them. But I felt compassion for the kids. I can't say
Mhm.
the same for the grandparents, but I
Okay.
really did feel because these kids were without a savior, they were without a protector.
Mhm.
The grandparents, here the grandparents are leading them down this rabbit hole. It's not going to end well.
Right.
If they still believe that stuff as adults, what's life going to be like?
Mhm.
Well, obviously, we see examples of it all the time.
Mhm. Wow. Exactly. Excuse me. I'm just kind of processing what you're saying that to say that like even in that situation in the midst of the fear and the threat for your life there were still these moments of curiosity, maybe even reflection and compassion. Would that be fair to say that that's
I think it would. And I think it was
okay?
a combination of the society or the part of society I was allowed to be in Little Rock. We were highly segregated. This is
Mm-hmm.
in the 40s and 50s. It's unbelievable now thinking back on that, that things could have been that way,
Mm-hmm.
but they were. And I was also an ardent churchgoer, and I was learning a lot, learning a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I was introduced to the Bible and reading, and I was putting together what was happening. And when you look, the information is all there, really,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of prophetic things. So
Mm-hmm.
things. You think Octavia Butler is prophetic when she writes the parable of the sower, but I tell you, the Bible speaks a hard truth about a
Mm-hmm.
lot of things. And one of the key things I got was that love is essential. And so that
Mm-hmm.
fits with this whole notion of respecting others, seeing them
Mm-hmm.
as equals, seeing them as valuable, people
Mm-hmm.
who have worth.
Mm-hmm.
And when I see people who are acting as if they don't have value, they don't feel loved, things are off base in their lives, my first thought is, how did it happen? What were the circumstances? You know,
Mm-hmm.
I want to probe and find out. But I've also learned you can't push that, you can't rush
Mm-hmm.
it. What you have
Mm-hmm.
to do is build a relationship first,
Yes.
especially in clinical work. You have to build a therapeutic relationship, which
Mm-hmm.
is different from the ordinary relationship because you're not a
Mm-hmm.
friend or a
Right.
therapist.
Right.
And to help people know this because sometimes people are so needy and so grateful for what you're doing, they simply want to absorb you. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Make you part of them, but you can't do that. You have to
Right.
help do that as well. But when you are able to build that communication channel so that people can trust what you're saying, because I would tell anybody who came to me for services, I always say to them, I say, look, nothing I can do. Uh, I don't know what's going on. I'm in
Mm-hmm.
the dark here.
Mm-hmm.
We together are going to have to figure this out. So I
Mm-hmm.
always made it a team effort. I wasn't there as the quote clinical psychologist sitting on the peak looking down on the mortals. No, I'm just Terry Roberts. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
I happen to have some information about psychological principles, which I'm willing to use in this work with you to help figure out what you want to do and how
Mm-hmm.
you might do it.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of people would say, well, I need a referral to somebody who knows more than you do, or who works differently. Oh, no problem. And
Right.
I had a series of folk that I could refer them to.
Mm-hmm.
But some people didn't want to do, which is the hard work. They didn't want to do the hard work. They,
Mm-hmm.
they wanted somebody to give them a prescription,
Right.
drug, give me something.
Right.
Don't talk to me about being responsible, whatever.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But those who stayed around, we did very good work,
Mm-hmm.
very important work too,
Mm-hmm.
because realize you're helping another human being come into his or her sense of fully
Mm-hmm.
being human. And
Mm-hmm.
that is beneficial to everybody.
Yes.
You want
Yeah.
people half in and
Mm-hmm.
half. You want whole people.
Mm-hmm.
Part of the
Yeah.
problem in the society, honestly.
I agree.
You got people who are hurting. Like now,
Mm-hmm.
this current so-called president we have, he's a man who obviously has missed out on a lot. I
Mm-hmm.
can't imagine what must have been said to him as a young person for him
Mm-hmm.
to be where he is now.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but there he is. And he's
Mm-hmm.
not, a lot of people like that.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm just kind of taking in what you're saying because I mean, through what I do with Birthing the Gifts and all of what I do professionally, I just so believe that is so much goodness that comes to individual people, but then communities and society when people focus on becoming healthy, whole, and well. And so that's what I like about this conversation about people birthing their gifts, because I think that's a part of it, to live your life in a way that aligns with how your values and how you're created to be in a lot of ways. So would you say that as you did that and you talked about your church going experience and your Bible reading experience, would you say that those principles you've learned, biblical principles, definitely values from your mom, helped you to navigate those difficult times, be it at Central or even outside of that? Because Dr. Roberts, that's what I want people to kind of get from it, because they may know the things that they're passionate about or they like to do, but they're having a hard time really navigating during the tough parts, the fearful parts, the all of that to kind of keep going. So I guess I'm
Right.
kind of asking you, did that help you keep going even through all of the challenges?
Oh yeah, yeah. And
Hmm.
and it basically started with the learning I did in church. Because it didn't take me long to figure out that not everybody who went to church believed in what the church was teaching.
Hmm.
It took me a while to figure out that that was just what churches are. They are for people who need to be there. They may
Hmm.
not know they need to be there. Uh,
Hmm.
so I had to rein in my own feelings about why is that person here? And obviously they're not paying attention, and so on. But the fact is that churches are a refuge for people in need.
Hmm.
And we're all in need at some level,
Mhm.
but some needs are just overwhelming. So
Mhm.
I picked that up as a key principle, and that is you treat, I guess it's caught up in the golden rule. You teach, you do unto others as
Mhm.
you would prefer them doing unto you.
Mhm.
That makes so much sense.
Mhm.
Back when I
Mhm.
first heard that, I thought, wow,
Mhm.
this is so cool. I'm never going to do anything to anybody. Life's going to be grand. No, it doesn't work that way.
Right. Right.
That's not dependent upon me.
Mhm.
I can be, a person who reaches out to others, but they may never return the favor in a
Mhm.
positive way. But that's
Mhm.
okay because that's where they are at the moment. I'm
Mhm.
not allowed to judge. I'm not allowed to say, you got to be different. But I am allowed to say that here are some options that I've found. See what you think.
Mhm.
Try them out.
Mhm.
And I use those with my own family members from time to
Okay.
time. I have this young
Okay.
niece who, for some odd reason, felt it was her duty to listen to Rush Limbaugh when he was alive,
Mhm.
spouting his crazy stuff. And one day she was visiting, and the conversation got around to that because from what she was saying, it seemed as if she'd been listening to Rush.
Mhm.
I said to her, I hear echoes of Rush Limbaugh. Have you been listening to him long? Oh, I'd never listened to him. Oh, I wouldn't listen to that. Oh, okay. So I didn't pursue it. But later in the evening, we decided that she would sleep over. And in Pasadena, there's a rule. You can't leave your car parked outside on the curb. You have to have it in the driveway or in the garage. So I said, give me your keys and I'll go move your car into the driveway. So I get in and turn on the ignition, and guess whose voice pops up on the radio?
Wow.
There's Rush.
It was rushed right
I,
there.
I didn't
Okay.
even confront her. I just said, oh, okay. So I parked the car and gave her the keys. Next day she took off. But I'm thinking she wasn't willing to admit the truth.
Mm.
There was no law against listening to Rush. She didn't have to
Mhm.
lie about it.
Mhm.
I picked that up anyway. You could tell from
Mhm.
she was framing her answers, the way she was thinking about things, the way she processed information was
Mhm.
all according to the gospel as per Rush Limbaugh.
Mhm. I see.
So that's another way of,
Mhm.
I think, helping people is that you confront them, and if they lie
Mhm.
about it, don't push them, don't
Mhm.
accuse them,
Mhm.
wait for another time.
Right.
It'll come
Mhm.
up again.
Mhm. It'll come
Time.
right back around again. Yeah,
Sure.
oftentimes it does. People will give you another opportunity to if
Yeah,
you
and you want to
decide to
preserve
confront
that
them. Mhm.
opportunity of being
Mhm.
able to have it come back.
Mhm.
Sometimes a lot of families wind up with members estranged from each other because they can't get over this one hump.
Mhm.
And I tell you, as humans, millions of humps you have to contend with all the time.
Mhm.
They would,
Mhm.
not careful.
Mhm. Absolutely. Absolutely. And you may have already answered this question because you kind of talked about kind of who you are naturally and kind of some values and gifts that were nurtured in your life. But if you could kind of speak more, unless we've kind of already touched on it, like what made you go into the mental health field? And it may have been this compassion, this curious reflection that you seem to so naturally do, even from when you were younger. But yeah, what else would you like to add to what made you go in that direction?
Well, uh, as a entering college student, I had a chemistry major,
Mhm.
and I was perfectly content to spend my time in the classes and in the labs doing chemistry.
Hmm.
But then during the second year, between the first and second year, I had an opportunity to go to summer school. I'd never been to summer school before. I thought, let me try this, see how it works. I'll take a few courses in summer school. So I decided to dabble in social sciences. Took a course in psychology and a course in sociology, two courses. And my eyes were open. I said, wow, there's a whole field here. Things could happen. I thought sociology, I like this because it had to do with gathering data, analyzing communities.
Mhm.
And I was a big fan of communities, especially Black communities, because I could see just from my own experience that Black people were not having a very good time in general.
Mhm.
And I thought, maybe if I become a sociologist, I can help figure this out. So I switched my major. I switched from chemistry to sociology, a flash.
Mhm.
But right away, I was disappointed. The
Mm.
professors were nice and they were brilliant, but their focus was off. We
Mm.
collected data. We actually go out and do field trips in communities collecting data. We
Mm.
collected lots and lots of data. And then that's where the action stopped as far as the community was concerned.
Mm.
It's as if we turned our backs on the community and started to splash around in the data and
Mm.
create models and algorithms and principles and all this stuff. I began to question why we do it. You know, no matter how many times you weigh this baby,
Mhm.
that baby needs nutrition.
Mhm.
Where's that piece? Well, they weren't happy with me. I wasn't happy with them. But I finished. I got the degree in sociology, but I wasn't happy. So then I
Mm.
went right into program and social work. I have a degree in social work,
Okay, and
MSW.
yes, that's awesome. Yeah. Mhm.
And I thought, okay, surely here people will be more sensitive to the needs of real people.
Mhm.
I got into school only to find that the majority of my fellow students were there to become licensed clinical social workers so they could do practice.
Mhm.
I thought, well, that's taking you away from the community in a way. Uh,
Mm.
I wasn't convinced that this was the right thing to do. But it turns out that part of the program requirement for students was that we had to be in therapy for 1 quarter as part of our
Mhm.
learning experience. So I found a therapist, and that's when the connection with psychology came to life.
Okay.
This woman was remarkable, excellent. We sat down
Wow.
from the first session. It was as if we'd known each other for years, all her doing.
Mm.
And I was shocked. I was blown away. Honestly, I came home and told my wife, I'm going into psychology.
Mhm. Oh, wow.
And I followed that up.
Mhm.
And then uh, I was disappointed actually in psychology too, because there was so much reliance on all these theories, theoretical principles and concepts. I couldn't see the efficacy of that,
Mhm.
especially in terms of what I knew about Black people and their lives. So we need something else.
Mhm.
But I pursued it all the way through. I got licensed in California and began to practice. But uh, I must tell you, I didn't follow what they taught me.
Okay.
I
Okay.
had learned something different. I learned
Mhm.
how to use what they had there. There was a
Mhm.
lot of good stuff, not to diminish that, but the
Mhm.
way it was put together was not to my liking.
Mhm.
So I got kicked out actually from grad school.
Oh,
Then
wow.
one of my professors pulled me aside and said, "You know what? You're on the brink of getting kicked out. And here's what I think. I think you really are eager to learn this and you want this, but if you keep doing it the way you're doing, people are not going to be happy." So I cleaned up my act,
Okay.
got through. And so from that point on, though, I really didn't, quote, saturate the people who came to me with a lot of psychological mumbo jumbo.
Mhm.
It was all very oriented toward two people in a relationship, one the
Mhm.
therapist, one the patient. And here's how we're going to work.
Mhm.
And I must say, it worked out okay,
Mhm.
for me at least. And I think for the people who stayed by to work with me, it did. And a lot of stories we don't have time to go into today, but I can tell you about some of the stuff that happened that
Mhm.
made it appear to me to be this was the space I was supposed to occupy.
Mm.
Early on, didn't know it, but there I was.
Really?
Because I was fascinated by a number of things, chemistry and math. Those are things I also continue to have an interest in.
Mhm.
But psychology as a concept, not so much as it's portrayed in the media or even
Mhm.
in the textbooks and all of that.
Mhm.
It could, use a big overhaul because, for one specific reason, psychology was implicated in maintaining racism in this country for so many years. It's become infected and
Mhm.
do something about that. I used to do some training for psychologists who had to have their credit hours,
Mhm.
and I chose to talk about what it meant to be a therapist in this multi-racial society we live in. getting them to that point where they could figure out how to be better at that.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think I did very much good, but I tried.
Okay. I'm sure you shared some wisdom. It's definitely with them because I'm probably wisdom that we can still continue to benefit from as mental health professionals, psychologists, therapists, just everybody out there. Um, Thank you for sharing that because I knew because one thing I want to point out that you said was, and I might not say the exact words you said, but you said, I think this is the space that I was supposed to occupy. How did you know that?
I didn't at first.
Okay,
I
okay.
didn't at first. And it sort of happened over time, I think, before I realized that this was one, I thoroughly enjoyed every second of it, no question
Mhm,
about it. And then I could see the consequences and the results of
mhm,
people having come to me and having gone through a process whereby they were able to figure it out,
mhm,
come to some realization that I need to change this or that and
mhm,
make things better.
mhm,
I had a young man come who didn't have a lot of money, and I agreed to do pro bono for him because he was in
mhm,
dire need, and we did some great work together.
mhm,
Years later, I get an envelope with his name on it one day, with a big check. It says, I couldn't pay you at the time, but I'm going to pay you now so you can do
mhm,
for others what you did
mhm.
for me. So
Wow.
I thought, wow, that's the
Yeah.
kind of payoff.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. That's wonderful. Knowing that that was, it sounds like it's transformative for him, which
Mm-hmm.
is kind of goes back to what you were saying about people having some sort of process of getting to really being more whole. So they can get on a good trajectory for their life and actually for the people around them.
Right,
That's so
right,
amazing.
right.
Mhm. I love that. I love that. Of course, as a psychologist, I'm like eating all of that up. They're like, just sounds so wonderful. That sounds so wonderful. I love how you said, I'm going to continue to kind of think about that, that you knew, like you said, it may have taken some time, but you realized this is the space that I'm supposed to occupy. What if it's people out there listening that says, I want that moment? Like, I want to be able to get there. I think I'm on the right path. I don't know, but it's hard, it's difficult. Are there any like words of wisdom or anything you would want to leave the people who will listen to this after we get it out that you would want to leave them with to hopefully keep them encouraged so hopefully they can have a moment like that where it's like, this is where I'm supposed to be type of moment.
That's a good idea. And I think it
Mhm,
is important and valuable for people to do some introspection, figure
mhm,
out what is it that I like to do? What is it that really causes me to exult in being who I am? And if it is something that you've experienced, follow that to see where it takes you. See if it's real forever. And I say it that way because sometimes it's not. When my kids were young, they would often come and say to me, Dad, I want this, I want this, I want this. And I said, okay, let's talk about that in a week. And then by the time the week comes around, they've forgotten about it. So I said,
right.
oh, okay. So, but if it's something that you really want and you feel it in your bones, put it this way. If it's something that you would do even if you weren't paid for it,
Mhm,
that may
mhm,
be a clue. But
mhm,
whatever it is, yeah, that may be the gift that is
mhm,
yours.
mhm,
And whatever that gift is, use it, nurture
mhm,
it, make
mhm,
it the best possible. And by the way, don't feel you have to emulate others.
mhm,
I recall hearing a woman some years ago who responded to the query uh, when Diana Ross was a big thing as a singer. And the question was put to her, uh, you like to hear Diana Ross? She said, no, I want to be Diana Ross. Okay.
mhm.
But no, that's not your gift to be somebody else. Your gift
Right.
is to be you and use your talents.
Exactly.
And because you're unique in the universe. I often
Mhm,
say this to people, every single individual in the universe is unique. Nobody's like you. And that's one of the beauties of being human. We have all
mhm,
this unique, all this diversity, if you will. You know, uh, I often cause some people a bit of distress when I talk about diversity because I say, look, anytime you have two people in the same room, you've got a room full of diversity. It doesn't
Hmm.
matter who two people are.
Hmm.
And they look at me strange. Oh, okay. Think about it.
Hmm.
But the truth is, once we accept the fact that we're all here and we all count,
Yes.
half the job is done.
Hmm. Yeah, I love that. So it seems like what you're saying, and this is something that I think we have to challenge ourselves to reflect on, is do we feel that we count and that we matter and we have value,
Yeah. A
you
lot of people
know?
struggle with
And
it.
what was that? Oh, I think it glitched a little bit. What was that that you said?
So a lot of people struggle with this notion about, you know, being good enough,
Yes.
being of value.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And that's an absolute barrier. So I love how you talked about that for people seeing that in themselves and just what are they passionate about? What do they really like that they would do, even if they weren't paid for it? See the value in ourselves and others, right? To kind of say, to be able to see that and work towards that compassion for ourselves and for others. And just keep, it sounds like you're saying, keep going down that path, keep doing that, keep doing that. And then hopefully that'll get people closer to this place of, knowing this is where I'm supposed to be, or like at
Absolutely.
least they're getting closer to it. It's a journey. Man, I'm gonna have to go back. It's like even when I do these interviews, I'm like I get so excited about it, and I look forward to going back and watching it to continue to kind of hear and just glean from what people share. Thank you so much just for sharing your journey. I know, like you said a couple of times, that we could kind of go down that path more if we had more time to share this and share that. So I know it's so much more to your journey than we had time to discuss today. And you shared some really key nuggets today with us from just your mom from young in when you were a young child all the way through, and you kind of carried us through different parts of your life. So thank you for sharing that with this platform, and hopefully people that are listening they're gleaning and are encouraged and inspired. I know that I am. So thank you very much. I
Well, thank
appreciate
you,
it.
Kyla, for inviting me on, and I wish you well.
All right, absolutely, absolutely. So it's been another edition of Birthing the Gifts. It's a process conversation series. Again, thank you, and thank you for wishing me well. I really do appreciate that.